Good afternoon from our final stop of day one of the Red River Farm Network Crop Tour presented by Pioneer. I'm Megan Overby and joined by Larry Lunder, field agronomist with Pioneer. And Larry, before we dive into some harvest management during a drought strategies, if you will, give us a quick recap of what we've seen today on the stops that we made.
Well, we started out in Douglas, North Dakota at Harris Seed Farms today. And of course, we talked about their challenges with the drought, how they had done with their canola crop, the soybean crop. And of course, we also got a chance to talk about his involvement with 21st Century Genetics, our wheat offering that we have with some of our sales agencies. From there, we went to McCluskey and talked with Paul Hagen at Mid-States Ag, where we got our chance to discuss our Enlist soybean technology and the success he's had controlling weeds and getting those varieties out into the field, and how, of course, some of his canola Liberty Link varieties had performed very well, and then what he was seeing with some of the corn hybrids he'd sold this year as well. So, some good stories to tell. And then, of course, we finished up the day with Neil Fonta and Elite Ag and got a chance to see some corn that was under a pivot for the year and what could be done. And, we found there was struggles there as well, even having the water, but of course they'd fared much better. And then Neil had also had the good fortune of also having some rain along the way to help supplement the irrigation. So all in all, pretty good day and kind of representative of what things have been like in western North Dakota this year.
Well, speaking of representative, we see this picture that we're standing in here with the cornfield that is obviously very drought stressed, probably more than we'd like to admit, but that's the reality of things this year. And so that brings about some challenges, or I guess strategies that we need to implement come harvest time. We can probably break that into two categories. You mentioned weed management. We know the weeds have actually thrived in these conditions. And so let's start there. How do we manage weeds come harvest time?
Well, what's the thing you've got to keep in mind, and the thing that was what I really saw that I liked this year in a lot of things that weren't so great, was that people did a very good job of controlling their weeds. They made those extra inputs rather than saying, no, it's not going to happen, I'm going to let this crop go. So they managed the weeds, kept the fields clean, and thereby gave them more than what they would have had they just let the weeds go. So where do we go as a strategy now? It just depends on what you're going to do. If you're going to chop the corn, or if you're going to, say, roll it into stover, there's some things you're going to do there to help, say, mitigate the nitrate buildup. Of course, if you're rolling it into stover, the ideal thing is to cut a foot or higher above the ground, because the majority of the nitrates are concentrated at the base of the corn plant. If you make the choice that you're going to chop it, once you ensile it and get it into that silage pile, within about 60 days, 2 months roughly, most of the nitrates will have formed into nitrous oxide and simply gassed off the pile, and you'll have controlled it that way. But that's key too, to monitor that, make sure that when you give your cattle the feed, it's not going to be, lethal for them to ingest, and you don't want to have any losses there.
So what about the crops that we are going to harvest? Because there are many crops out there that are certainly harvestable, maybe even pretty close to average in some cases. Where do we start when we decide, okay, what am I going to run through the combine and how am I going to do it?
Well, you're gonna make those yield estimates. Maybe we're gonna do that on some of our better ground where we think we have the best potential. The thing to keep in mind this year, even on the better ground, we're gonna have drought-stressed crops. We can't afford to let things stay out there indefinitely. We have to be very timely with our harvesting and get it off, because with these drier conditions, we're going to have the plant that is cannibalized a lot of times the stock in order to put what it can into the ear in a corn plant. We can have, even with soybeans, we can have susceptibility to starting to lose pods and pods splitting open on us. So it's going to be very, very we're going to need to be very timely on our harvest and on our management there. And then we'll get down to even, let's say, people that have put in sunflowers, which of course root down the farthest. They have a good taproot. They probably fared better than a lot of crops, although we won't see some of the yields we would like to see. But there too, we have to be timely with the harvest because we're going to be likely more susceptible to having stocks go down and losing some of what's out there if we're not timely with harvest this year, due to all the stress conditions that the crop was under.
Mm-hmm. Well, what timeliness we had with the combine rolling by as we're talking about harvest. And so, Larry, last thing I'd like to end on is to talk about, while we realize there's many drought-stricken crops out here, there's actually some areas in your territory that look really good.
Yeah, we've had some areas, certainly the areas around Cleveland, Streeter, as we move, Steel, Tappan, there's some better areas. Certainly, and one of the surprising things is we have areas down in Sioux County, such as Selfridge, that have some good crops throughout some areas. Some weren't so good, and some were pretty decent. As we move out into Mott, New England, Richardson country, we had more rain than a lot of the rest of the territory, and we've done a little better than we have across other areas. So certainly there's always some bright spots to tell. Up along Highway 5, we'd have had pretty decent rain, a little cooler temperatures, and there's some better potential up there too. So overall a pretty tough year, but certainly a few bright spots out there as well.
Yes, well, certainly. We'll end today's tour on that bright note, so thanks so much, Larry.
Thank you. We appreciate your time today.
Yes, well, again, day one of the Red River Farm Network Crop Tour presented by Pioneer. Reporting, I'm Megan Overby.